There you are.
Yep.
You just are Bernie today.
So I think we're yeah. So I think we're on. Uh,
It says it's streaming. It says it's live.
that's my favorite. That's my favorite, just for sentimental reasons, and I like a lot of them.
Uh-huh.
There's also a beautiful drawing, and I don't want to show it because the artist's signature is on there, but I don't know who the artist is, and I don't want to show it without giving them credit, which I think people do far too much. But it's a beautiful drawing of just Bernie sitting there.
Mm.
And I don't know. I love Bernie. And someone the other day tweeted, can we just stop hero worshiping Bernie, please? And
And then
and I retweeted it with, nope. I, and other people tried to be like nuanced. I'll support him as long as he doesn't mess up and all this stuff. And I'm like, sorry,
right.
I, I have no, I have no critical thinking space when it comes to uh, my hero worship of Bernie. And all I can say is, if he were ever in such a position of power where people would need to effectively hold him accountable, then I would figure out how to do that gladly. Because to be in that position would be an infinitely better position than we're in right now. And to me, that's part of why these memes took off, is
Right.
that everyone universally it was like this amazing, we brought together the liberals and the left
I know.
in
It's
a
beautiful.
common, yeah, in common hero worship of Bernie. But anyway, this is Solidarity House Morning Show. um, Oh, I was also going to say that my favorite Bernie meme is the one where he demanded all this stuff now, and that
Uh-huh.
came out yesterday, that he's like, we could do all of the following things if we wanted to through Senate reconciliation,
Uh-huh.
and it was, just all of the things
Mhm.
that we've been fighting so hard to put at the center of the agenda. And so, no, I'm not going to stop hero worshiping Bernie. This is Solidarity House Morning Show. You can learn more about us at patreon.com/solidarityhouse. Today we have Yana with us, and we're going to talk about some serious stuff, which is Yana's on the job hunt. And so she's got some shit to say about capitalism and the job search. Capitalism and the search to sell your labor, the pitching of your labor power under capitalism, and that's pretty serious. So it's nice that we're kind of starting out with something a little bit more lighthearted. I'll have some other announcements at some point or another in the stream, but I wanted to let Yana talk about Bernie memes first.
Yeah, I want to talk about Bernie memes for a couple minutes. And then we'll get into the more serious, like HR kind of stuff. So, oh, look, there's Zoom. That's what. Hey, so Matt and I have been planning on talking about like HR practices for like at least a week, and but then this happened, this glorious thing with the Bernie memes. And actually, if you want a kind of serious take on it, Naomi Klein actually just wrote this like amazing essay, like breaking down like 5 different possible things that this could mean. But she ends it with this phrase where she talks about how the reason why this was able to go viral is the not me us thing, that there is actually this whole movement of people out there who can literally take over every social media platform on the afternoon that should have been Biden's big moment and should have been like all about celebrating Trump being out of office. Actually, we just took that shit over with a bunch of Bernie memes, and just like the sheer like cultural breadth. I just want to like slide through this and just like quickly pause on a bunch of these, like how many different kinds of cultural references have gotten pulled into this thing, and it's just totally beautiful. I don't know why that's not moving, but um yeah, just like so many different things. And I want to pause on a couple of them, like Bugs Bunny, Cardi B, Forrest Gump, Hamilton, the historic places, just so much gloriousness. And one of my favorites, I mean, I love this. I love this. So perfect. Bernie in the bowling alley with the boys. Um, but there's a couple here that are like, oh, and then like Bernie's gloves with googly eyes, and just the sheer cuteness of this and how much we are just celebrating how much we love this man. Okay, look at this. Big Bird and Bernie. Like how glorious does it get? And then the cast of Schitt's Creek. And and then there's one that's like a little more serious, kind of like this one is kind of like layers and layers and layers of cultural critique. Anyway, so we just have been having so much fun sharing these memes. And if I get out of here, I want to share my all-time favorite one that I'm hoping is going to earworm everyone. Well, here's one. Julie McAllister, just down the road, who I met when we were both on the campaign trail, stuck Bernie on the top of an Albany County sheriff's truck.
That's my favorite. Can you blow that up? Can you make that bigger?
It's actually it's my thing right now. I think that's as big
Okay.
as you can get it. Yeah. Yeah. So Bernie sitting on top of an Albany County sheriff's truck. Julie McAllister. Go Julie. Totally awesome.
Really, I guess that's my serious favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, way to go, Julie. Let's have Julie on the show.
So much fun.
This is just, I mean, to me, it's a game changer.
Yeah. So good. So good. We should just blow these up and put them all over downtown Laramie. But my favorite one, which just makes my 80s kids' heart sing, is this one. And I just hope that like everybody starts in Prince voice in their heads singing to themselves, dig if you will, my mittens.
Oh
You
my
know,
God.
so good. So fucking good. So good. I don't know who did this, but Sandy brought us was the one on my who it came through on my feed. There's also this one over here that's like Dolly Parton doing Bernie's non-existent hair, which is kind of awesome. So yeah, just so impressive how fast we were able to take it over. And Naomi, did I say this already, that her phrase at the end of that article was that this was just a friendly little flex of the left's like social power right now with not so friendly undercurrents, kind of like, don't fuck with us because we can literally take shit over in a heartbeat if we really want to and if we really flex. And so
Well,
just loving all of
so here's the what I wanted to say was that it it brought together the liberals and the
it.
left, though, the kind of the center left and the further left, because uh, I saw people who, kind of, I'll just say, I have a lot of liberal friends who are, well, let's just call it the professional class.
Mhm,
I have a lot of suburban liberal friends, right? And uh, they their response to Bernie's campaigns in
uh-huh,
2016 and 2020 were to, let's just say, their responses ranged from nervously rattling their jewelry to sometimes just being, gratuitously cruel
yeah,
about Bernie's candidacy and sort of the hope that it represented. Like it
mhm,
represent,
right,
like, to me, like it seemed like what they were most resentful of was the sort of utopianism, the healthy utopianism of the Bernie campaign. They really hated that because they knew that their candidates fucking sucked,
right,
and so there was a lot of that kind of um, consternation on their part,
mhm,
and all of them were sharing fucking Bernie memes the last 2 days.
yeah, yeah,
So
so
I just
beautiful.
want to say welcome
Mhm,
to the revolution,
uh-huh,
uh, Prince and the Revolution, and the real revolution. And I guess I will just leave them, leave those liberals who have come over to this side on the Bernie meme battle with this thought. Are you willing to fight for someone who is different than you? Are you willing to fight for people who don't look like you? Are you willing to fight for people who make a lot less money than you? Are you willing to do that? Because we do have some momentum right now,
Mm,
uh, and uh, and maybe they feel safe. Bernie's not going to run again. You know,
mhm.
Bernie's going to continue to do what he's doing right now, and maybe they'll get behind that. Maybe, and so I've got some hope in the midst of all of that. And so this was a very hopeful,
Mhm.
kind of couple of days worth of memes as well. I really love them, and thank you for putting all those things together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we made one, right? So we got in
Right.
the game here. So there's this thing that lets you put Bernie anywhere. So I just tossed this together last night. And this is a very old picture of our house because as you can see, like there's an attempt at
It
landscaping.
is.
And
Stared at it for several minutes going, when was this? This must be 10 years or more, I
more
would
than
think.
that, I think. I mean, almost all these trees have died, but it's the paint job that was on the house when we moved in, so it can't be too old. But yeah, maybe 10 years. I don't know. Um,
I don't know, but this is great.
it
Yana
was
made this.
yeah. And this is actually a little bit of a serious plea. I mean, speaking of like fighting for people who are different than you, I mean, we're trying to create a space where, people who are struggling economically, where people of color, where queer folks, where poor people are able to actually like have some economic stability, and we are struggling to get over the hump to be able to get to that point. And if you have been thinking about joining us, now Bernie and I are inviting you to actually like get in touch. And now would be a really good moment because we actually are not sure we're going to make it. And we could really use you and everybody else who's been thinking idly, someday it would be so great to live in a commune. And gosh, I really like those people.
And that house.
And that
Yeah.
house, look at the
And
house.
that's one of the things we're struggling with. We're asking a bunch of different questions right now. Can we, as a commune, stay on this property? Will we have enough members? Will we have viable economic models? How should we own or co-own or cede the ownership of this space? We're asking like all of these kind of existential questions, and Bernie is once again asking you to let us know if you are interested in joining. This is the time. And Bernie actually called into our very first Solidarity House episode, and we weren't there to answer the phone, so he left a message on this old-fashioned answering machine, where he talked about growing up in a kibbutz, and that he totally supported our endeavor. And it might have been Luke Jensen, my friend, I want to say as a footnote, imitating Bernie, but
Uh,
Bernie definitely did call and leave a message with us, wishing us the best of luck. And here he is again, uh, uh, coming out for us.
yeah, yeah, cool. Great. Okay, everybody. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. So,
Sounds good.
yeah, great. Do you want to do those other announcements, or should we start talking about really shitty hiring practices under late stage capitalism?
I wanted to
Those
I
away.
wanted to hit record when we have that discussion so that we can slip that discussion into one of our podcasts. So I'll be doing that. And I guess we've got some podcasts coming up. We're cranking them out as we have time. We've got a bunch of stuff. We have two different interviews with trans folks who are really, really serious, active Marxists and communists. And we talk about why in those podcasts, one of the things we talk about is why is it that To me, the answer is obvious, because I think if you understand Marxism and understand trans, kind of the new way of thinking about biology and sexuality and culture, then it makes perfect sense. And it makes perfect sense to these friends who are deep in the movement, in both sides of that movement. And so we've got a couple of podcasts coming out about that, some really, really good interviews about that coming up. We also will have a podcast version of another amazing conversation that we had yesterday on the book Settlers by Jay Sakai, an extremely important and controversial and much discussed more than it is read book. So we're going to have that coming out. All of this stuff is made possible by our Patreon support. So if you like the fact that we do Bernie memes, Marxism and trans issues, if you like the fact that we cover settlers, if you like the fact that we do a Marxism in 20 minutes video for you, if you like the fact that on top of that we do a bunch of silly stuff as well as politics, culture, society, all kinds of stuff, local issues. If you like the fact that we've interviewed Lynette Grable and other people on the cutting edge of progressive Wyoming politics here, then please support us at patreon.com/solidarityhouse. Your support is integral to our continued existence and our continued ability to do various media projects where we're just trying to amplify people's voices, the voices of people that are doing some good. And spread Bernie memes and other stuff too. So please do that. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and hit record now.
All right, there we go.
Yeah.
We're recording. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so we want to talk about in capitalism, what defines the working class, or under, socialist theory, what defines the working class is
Having to
the
work.
fact that you sell your labor power, that the way that you exist, the way that you subsist, the way that you feed yourself, the way that you take care of your family is by selling your labor power, unless you're one of a tiny little class of people that don't have to do that because they can manipulate their money. They can manipulate the money they have to generate their wealth and sustain themselves. But for the rest of us, we sell our labor power. And so selling means, in this economy, especially, means going out and pitching yourself and selling yourself. So there must be a lot of feelings attached to that. And I think are you on?
I'm on.
There you
Yeah.
go. Okay, great.
There I am. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, so I'm in that process right now. And so I've been doing mostly freelance work for about 15 years, and sometimes dipping into having a local low wage job when the finances got really tight. And a few years ago, did a round of this trying to get a job thing, and eventually gave up, and got some interviews, got to meet some really great folks, but but after sorry, about 2 months of it, I gave up. And this time I've now been back in that search process since late October and haven't given up yet. I'm still doing it. I'll be doing at least 2 more applications today after we are done with this. Um, and I feel like I'm coming to it with a much more astute analysis about human resources and HR, and particularly hiring practices. And so I wanted to sort of break some of that down and share some of that with us as a little bit of kind of expose energy, but without like naming any names, because I'm only applying for jobs with groups that I really like and I'm excited about what they're doing. And so I don't want to bash any of those organizations. And God, there have been some terrible practices that have come out in the hiring processes, even with groups who are doing really cool stuff. And so my niche that I'm working in, as problematic as it is um, professional class nonprofit stuff for the most part. And so I'm applying for executive director roles with small to medium sized nonprofits. I am applying for HR stuff because HR is actually fascinating and is kind of where the rubber hits the road around justice and workers' rights and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so I've actually gotten more and more intrigued with that segment of work. So that's the niche that I'm talking about. And I think a lot of this is probably applicable to other work niches as well, but that's the space that I'm coming out of right now. And so I wanted to go through a whole bunch of like really bad practices and talk about why they're bad, and then also have a little bit of time to talk about what nonprofit organizations can do that actually is not bad practice, other than don't do this stuff. Some other things that are actually like really good practices that nonprofits can be doing. Um, so should I just launch into that? Am I just monologue?
Absolutely. And I'm also dropping some links as we're talking
Okay, great.
on stuff that's related to what you're saying. And I'm also monitoring. We do actually have a lot of people watching today. And
Awesome. Right.
so I'm monitoring if there's any comments that are worth sharing. Somebody liked our phrase, the cutting edge of Wyoming progressive politics. And so,
Mhm.
uh, I'm glad that we've gotten
Yeah.
some positive feedback. But yeah, if people have questions or comments, they can drop them on that. Where I'm looking at the Facebook feed. I'm not looking at our stupid underwatched YouTube feed. I'm looking at the Facebook feed. So go ahead and drop questions there or comments if you like, and we can share some a little bit later.
All right, awesome, awesome. And I do want to say, like, my Facebook community has been like super great and supportive when I've been whining about some of this stuff. So I know that y'all are out there are tuned into a bunch of this stuff. So the number one thing that I want to say is a terrible practice is not listing a salary. And groups will sometimes do this big like competitive salary with benefits, but it's like if you're talking about like New York City wages, that's like super different from like, Wyoming wages. And like that phrase doesn't actually mean anything. And what it is setting up is this really awkward dynamic where you're going to have to tell them what you think you should be making. And there have been all of these studies done that indicate that like women and people of color consistently undersell ourselves in that moment, and white men have no problems asking for the fucking moon. And so you end up like replicating all of these really bad like racist and sexist dynamics that are already out there in terms of like wage differentials, and also putting somebody in a position where it's like if I ask for too much, if I'm a woman and a person of color, I'm probably going to get labeled uppity, and I'm going to like end up with this like getting off on sort of a bad foot with my employer, because we're often interpreted as being like asking for too much, and and not knowing our place and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of this is subtle, and there's definitely, I don't think that there's like, I don't think people are trying to do that in how they respond to people. But when you don't list a salary, you set people up for these really bad dynamics. And
Hmm.
salary ranges can actually do the same thing. And,
Right.
and they're better because at least you know where the bottom is. you know and at least you have some sense of like, if I were to ask for the top, I'm not asking for something that the organizational budget presumably can't handle. And so it's a little bit better. But increasingly best practices are considered just tell me what the fucking salary is, like give a number instead of a range. And
Just tell me what the fucking salary is.
just tell me what the fucking salary is. Don't make me go through all of these hoops and play all these games, and potentially end up in like a really bad initial, like, here's my first thing that I did on the job was I pissed off my boss. I'm like, yeah, yeah, not cool.
I'm
Um,
thinking also about how that affects.
oops,
Oh, I was looking at the video feed, and I was like, "Why is Yana still talking?" And the video feed is delayed. Um, I'm, I am not. I am not a smart man this morning, but I'm thinking about also how that is a assumes makes very ableist assumptions about people's emotional and mental uh,
Totally.
uh, sort of orientation, right? If you've had some PTSD in your life or anything like that, the
Cover,
way
a
that you are handed that question, and that's the thing, like that's just more work that they expect you to do.
right.
It's emotional and mental work that they expect you to do to kind of solve their problems for them. And yeah, I think that you don't have the capacity to do those things in uniform ways, right?
Mhm. Right, right. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And actually not listing a start date or even a like, we're hoping to have it start on this date, um, can also introduce a bunch of like weirdness for people where it's like, so I've been in the job search since late October. It's now late January. And I've been in limbo emotionally for that many months, and like not listing a start date actually adds more limbo to people and also makes it really difficult. Like at what point do you tell if you have a current job? I mean, I'm fortunate to not have a current job in some ways. It's like at what point do you let your current employer know that you're looking, and like what's actually like respectful and an integrity on that end of things, and like not having potential start dates listed also just creates like there's a delay to when you're able to actually have good communication if you care about your current employer. Like say you're in a field that you really love the work and you really like who you're currently working for and are moving on for whatever reasons, like not like the less information you share in a job listing, the more insecurity you're creating for the people who are applying for that job for you. So,
Hmm.
so don't do that one either. Um,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
So
So
many of these things we just, people sort of just assume that these are the norm, and
they
they're
are,
somewhat shocked when people are like, when people sort of talk about why they're bad, why these practices are bad. It tends to surprise people who have just sort of lived with those assumptions.
right, right. Well, and I learned something great. So this is another piece that I want to share that is really new for me and actually came out of applying for a job with, and I am going to name this organization because they're fabulous. So there's a group called City Bureau in Chicago, and they have on their website where their job listings are, they have this great blog post about why cover letters suck. And I had never thought about it. And basically what they say basically is like when you ask people to write a cover letter and you don't give them any guidance at all, essentially what you're saying is read my mind. Figure out of the ethers what you think I want to know, instead of just asking people a few simple questions like, here's the questions. Don't worry about a cover letter. Just answer these three questions because this is actually what we want to know and actually what we're looking for. And, unless you're literally hiring mind readers, you just shouldn't do this to people. And cover letters are like, this is the only job I've applied for. So I think I've applied for about 30 jobs at this point, and this is the only one that didn't have like some version of you need to send us a cover letter. And it's just a mind reading game. And how much cleaner and more respectful is it to say, actually, these are the four things that we want to know. Give us a paragraph on each one of these. And like, it was hugely relieving to me the first time that I saw that, was like, oh my God, you can do that. You cannot ask for cover letters. And I've been on the other end of it and have done a fair bit of HR work with the organizations that I've been involved with, like as a board member, or I've been the ED of in the past. And I've always asked for a cover letter. And I'm really getting it being in this process right now, how it's hugely time consuming. I probably spend 2 hours per application that I've done, because you're looking at your resume, trying to like figure out, are the things I should emphasize or leave out? I'm writing a cover letter. I'm doing that mind reading game. I'm reading your website. I'm trying to understand who this organization is. And what a relief to just have an organization say, can you just answer these four questions? I'm like, oh my fucking God. what a huge relief. And probably a lot of employers are missing candidates that would actually be great at the job, but they're not terrific mind readers. Like they're not able to suss it out. But unless that's part of the job, um, don't judge people based on that. But that's 100% standard operating procedure in hiring stuff. Write us a cover letter. So that's been fascinating.
I'm looking for comments. I know that some people are working on some comments. Yuri says that in California and New York, you can no longer ask what people make in a job interview. What do you think of that?
I think it's great. I mean, I don't think that you should ask that question because like right now, so I'm going to be, hopefully none of the places that I'm applying for who are going to use this information are listening to this, but I've never made more than $30,000 a year. And if I tell you that, you're going to be like, "Oh, great, let's pay her 40 for a job that we would gladly pay 80 for." Like, yeah, it's garbage practice. Don't do it. Thank you, California and New York, for actually being ahead of the curve on that one, or actually right where the curve should be, I guess. So, yeah, cool. Okay, so here's the other thing that's related to this cover letter thing. So I've had these two extremes. One extreme was send us a 1 to 3 page application. So 1 to 3 pages that includes your cover letter, your resume, and your references. So I've got 30 years of job history at this point, and so I literally for this group had to write a short little like cotton candy cover letter because you can't say anything in a paragraph. Figure out how to cram my resume into this tiny little space and include my references, and I did it, and it took me 2 hours to do it. Where it would have like taken me less effort. There's this Mark Twain quote about like, sorry, this letter is so long, but I didn't have the time to write it shorter. Like actually shortening an entire career down to 1 to 3 pages is a complete pain in the ass. Don't do that. Like you don't need to do that in order to be able to quickly sort. Like I've reviewed hundreds of applications on the other end of it. You don't need to make somebody do all of that work to like get it down to that length. And you're probably missing information that could be really interesting if you make people do that. On the other end, I've had a couple that are write us a cover letter, send us your resume and your references. Answer these 4 questions and send us 2 relevant writing samples. So this is like a book. You don't need all of that to be able to do a first cut. And basically what both of these practices are communicating to someone is actually, we're just going to rub your noses in the fact that we have all of the power and we can make you do whatever we want to make you do in the course of this hiring process. Like both of them are terrible.
It's this competitive framework that is emphasized in this, and that this is healthy competition in the labor market, and so we can turn this into an essay contest. It's an essay contest to see whether you can feed your family.
Right, totally. And it's garbage, garbage, garbage. Just please don't do this stuff to people. And the other thing is that, so my guess is most people don't spend as much time as I spend on applications because I'm getting pickier about who I'm applying to and what I'm applying for. But imagine having a full-time job, having a family, being in a job search, and being asked to jump through all of these hoops, and you have one job. Almost all of these are just one position, hundreds of people applying for that position. And you're going to make them jump through all of these hoops to do that. And this is like having another full-time job for a lot of people. I mean, it's really, really, really rough. And like the more hoops you make people jump through, the harder it's going to be on people who are trying to be responsible to the rest of their life. And those are the people you want, are the people who are trying to be responsible to their lives, right? But you like make them do all of this garbage in order to get, to jump through hoops and prove yourself to them. So, yeah.
So you're talking about all this stuff, and And the easy answer, the sort of easy lefty answer is to say, well, that's why we need a job guarantee, a jobs guarantee, and that's why we need basic, UBI, and that's why we need to sever things like health insurance and other goods from having a job, so that all of these things are not at stake. Doing a lot of those things obviously would really empower workers, including workers who are in the labor market. And so doing those things would be great. But it also kind of sounds like you're saying that even absent those things, there are cultural practices that that the professional sector, including the nonprofit sector, uses that should also change, that would be less dehumanizing to people.
Totally, totally. Yeah, and so so this is some of it, and I do think that all of those things would be great. I mean, that is my lefty politics, are like, we want a world where people aren't forced into well, actually, so the world that I want is one where we disconnect work from money, and we disconnect
Exactly.
people doing what calls them from. I mean, the reason that I'm willing to jump through all these hoops is that there are fucking amazing things happening all over, not just this country. I've even applied for some stuff outside of the US, but there's amazing things and projects that I would love to work on. And it's like, basically, this dynamic is, let me beg you to be able to contribute to your amazing thing, and let you struggle to figure out how to pay me to contribute to your amazing thing. God, I would just love to be supporting these organizations. Like, if I could be putting in time to support, a bunch of these different projects, that would be amazing. But I don't get to do that because capitalism is the gatekeeper for where we put our energy and what we do with our time. And so, probably these groups would love to have the 5 or 6 people who are super enthusiastic about their work being able to just contribute to their work, and not having to go through
Hmm.
all of this stuff, and not having to have just one slot that they've been able to figure out how to pay for. It's like,
That's
perfect
brilliant.
level setup.
That's brilliant. And it
Yeah.
reminds me, if you don't mind, of a story I want to tell about the first time I met a mutual friend of ours, Tawana Petty.
Oh,
I was in Detroit, working. I was working for the Public Banking Institute at the time, and we were out in Detroit talking to folks from the Grace Lee Boggs Center about what we wanted to do was have a public banking discussion, a Detroit-wide public banking discussion. And I learned that day, and I can't remember whether it was Tawana or whoever it was at the Bog Center. They were talking about the different projects going on in Detroit, and all of the different things that people were doing, from urban agriculture to organizing to home repair and auto repair to um, various ways of meeting people's basic needs, um, water purification, all of these different projects that people were doing, and that these were not jobs in the employment sense, but they were work. And there's a difference between jobs and work when you're talking about building alternative communities that are that create their own economies, their own local economies.
yes.
And that was the day. I was that years old when I really first realized the difference between employment in the capitalist sense and work in the community building
Yeah.
sense, not just community organizing, but all sorts of labor that could be put to value in real terms, in terms of what really real people needed in neighborhoods and in cities and everywhere, and how that's different from the notion of paid, wage labor, salaried labor, and that contradiction is such an acute contradiction of capital.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, the idea that, there is so much work that needs to be done in the world, but there's actually very little employment. The ratio of like real work that needs to be done to employment. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that is like, you know, made up just because it's like somebody's figured out how to make a profit off of it that actually doesn't really have much real value. And so like value, work, labor, pay, all of that has gotten sort of all mashed together in a way that has warped the entire concept of contribution and, being a part of your community and being able to give something. And yeah, I mean, in my ideal world, like I wouldn't be in any of this. And, and the exhaustion of not living in that world is what has driven me to finally be looking for a full-time job and like getting away from having the kind of free time that I have right now to be able to be contributing to other things. And that completely sucks. And we as individuals are pushed into making these choices that aren't really choices in some ways. And, and doing and participating in the labor market, even when we know perfectly well that this really isn't the way the world should work, in an ideal world. So it's fascinating being in this with sort of my eyes open and still going, and I want a job, yeah.
That's a great conversation. And a couple of other questions and comments that have come up on the board is one person has asked, what is the design of your dream application? And I think that must mean what would you think a just and like good application would look like?
Well, I think a resume is fine. I mean, I think tell me what you've been doing with your time makes a lot of sense. And I would love it if resumes would um, typically include and have more emphasis on what you've contributed to your community. I mean, what your volunteer activities have been and that kind of stuff, and that we see those as being equally relevant, because it is like most of my valuable skills were actually built originally in contexts where I wasn't getting paid for it. So I have my resume broken into like, there's my work stuff. There's, in my case, my intentional community experience. Because if I didn't have that on there, there would be multi-year gaps in my resume where I was learning stuff like accounting and farming and a whole bunch of other valuable stuff. And so I think that is fine. I do think not doing cover letters, but asking questions for like, what do you really need to know in order to figure out if somebody's a good match with your job? And then I would stop there. And that would be the first round, would be just those questions and somebody's resume. And one of the things that is an increasing practice in at least the professional sector of the nonprofit world is asking people to do some real work and some kind of project where it's like write a letter to a foundation, blah blah, or solve this HR problem for us, and pay people to do that work. So this is one of the key differences. I've had this a couple times in the organizations that I've been the most excited about working for, have both asked me to do some work project. One of them didn't pay for that time. And the other one is offering to pay for that time. And so, give people 3 to 4 hours of a budget and ask them to do some real work and pay them the wage that they would be making doing that work for you, and pay them decently. So I think something like that with interviews, so first round, I'd say questions and resume, do an interview, then ask somebody to do a work project and pay them to do it. And because that's what you really want to know is how are they actually going to work, with us? And, and then probably another interview, like a final interview with the people whose work you liked the most, or you might get your answer at that point with the first interview and work. But and communicate really well every step of the way. Tell people what the timelines are. Tell them where they're at in the process. Tell them if you want something more from them. Allow them to ask questions in the process. Like, don't leave your end of things as a black box for people. But give people an opportunity. One of the things that I've liked is the interviews where they say at the beginning, so we're going to ask questions for about 45 minutes, and then we're saving 15 minutes at the end for you to be able to ask questions. And that's great, because you also learn something about candidates when you hear what kinds of questions they're interested in. But then I also get to start being real with them about like, this is what I'm wondering. Like, I don't understand this, or how does this work and that kind of stuff. So I think something like that is probably feels like a healthy, mutually respectful process that has, has a job posting originally that has, the salary and all that kind of stuff and what the benefits are and everything. And that's all laid out at the beginning. So I think something like that is like actually a healthy process.
Someone else posted, studies show the more info you put in a job description, the more people of color opt out. I also asked if they had a link to that because I started to look and I'm not finding that particular stuff. But
Mhm.
there's a bunch of articles about what does discourage people
Mhm.
from people of color from applying for jobs. So what do you know about that?
Well, that's fascinating. I did not know that piece of information. And if I had to venture a guess, it would be that some really, really, really long job listings uh, make it sound like you have to be everything in order to get the job. And so I don't necessarily think that you should do a 3-page long job listing. I think you need to be honest. I've actually had groups lie in their job listings, which like don't do that. And I think some language that is encouraging that says, here's what we're looking for in an ideal candidate. And we also know that nobody fits all of this. I mean, those are the jobs where I've been
Mhm.
like, okay, good. They're actually being real about it. Like I do think that, both women and people of color tend to assume that we're not as qualified as we are about things. And so I absolutely can see how a super long, detailed job listing could put people off. And so I'm not necessarily interested in long. I'm interested in accurate and having the information up front about what you'll actually be making, what the hours are, what does full-time mean to your organization is an increasingly important question because a lot of groups are starting to define full-time as 30 hours. Some groups still define it as 60 hours. I want to honestly know what your expectations are. But I'll be curious. I'm going to go look at those links afterward because I had not heard that information before, and I can absolutely see how that would happen. So for me,
Mhm.
it's not about bulk of information. It's about having like a specific set of information that's available in the job description. So, but I'm going to read this because I think that's I want to understand what that's
Yeah,
about.
hopefully the commenter will put up some links.
Yeah, please do.
And I was going to add that I used to work in academia in the university system, and it seems to me also another thing that I see if I see a job description that is very detailed is that they actually have someone in mind for that job.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
that there might be someone who is, taking that inside track, if you will,
mhm.
that job. And so they're kind of over specifying a lot of the things with the job description.
Right.
And I feel like that happens in academia sometimes because, people know people, but also because sometimes the acting director or the acting person in a position, and that's probably true of the nonprofit sector too, the acting this or the acting that, the 1 year temporary person might have an inside track to the job. Uh, it all just feels so slimy when you think about it in the
Yeah.
context of we are, I am selling my labor power to live. I have
Yeah.
to sell my labor power to live. And all of these games are happening, all these hoops I have to jump through, all of these um, inside tracks that people have. Think about the number of times that adults told you when you're a kid and they're giving you advice on becoming an adult and going out in the job market. And what do they tell you? It's not what you know, it's who you know, which is a way of saying you have to have tons of social capital and insider track and insider status. And if you wink at people and if you back scratch, then they'll cheat for you. They
Right.
will fucking cheat for you and they will give you that job. And so it's just it's really dehumanizing, I think.
Mhm.
And it's really, and it to me illustrates also this. idea that Marx and Engels talk about in the Communist Manifesto, when they say that all of the ideals, all the moral ideals, all of the morality of bourgeois ideology just melts away under capitalism. So they
Yeah.
have all these values that you're supposed to have about honesty and integrity, and then adults tell you that it's fucking not what you know, it's who you know.
Right, right, totally. And there is absolutely a big element of that. And I actually had a really complicated emotional response the other day to, so I was reading a job posting, and pretty close to the top of it, they had put a line in there that said, "You should be aware that we've identified a strong candidate from an earlier hiring process." And I was like, appreciate the honesty. Does that mean I shouldn't, like, what? And and it was like, and I hate that there are probably a bunch of jobs that I've put the labor in and applied for that was probably true of, and they weren't upfront about it. And but then having them come right out and say it was also like, I don't fucking know what to do with that. So it is a really interesting thing, and I think that inside track thing um is really true. And I think that there's also like good ethical practices around posting jobs, even if you are likely to be hiring from within. But the whole thing is like, we're trying to navigate this complicated ethical territory within a system that is fundamentally unethical. And it makes everything feel weird. Like honesty feels weird, dishonesty feels weird, but kind of understandable. And it's just like it's just a garbage system, period. And there is like very little. I think there's only a few really strong leverage points that groups have to actually be doing it really well. And I think like honesty is one of them. And making it clear that you're actually looking for a real human being and not some kind of robot or something. And like saying things like, we realize not everybody is going to have all of these traits. And it would be good to have a chunk of them, something like that, I think is going to be better. But it's
I just have to ask,
garbage.
is Rosa snoring in your room?
She is. Rosa is snoring. I have a very large dog snoring. Sorry.
That's hilarious. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Have dog
You were talking about something really important.
and Rosa's like, I'm so bored. I'm asleep. um, Cool. Well, let me see. I'm just going to look at my notes here for a second and say, so one of the other things, and this was a very niche thing, but I just want to name so one of the groups that I applied for, part of the compensation was in-kind compensation. And it came out in the course of the conversations that they don't report that to the IRS. And this was like room and board, like a big chunk of the compensation, which I'm like, there are some circumstances in which that's legal to not count that. But there's also a whole bunch of circumstances in which that's not legal. And putting employees in a position where they have to either join you in committing tax fraud or like tell on you to the IRS is a really shitty position to put people in. So like, and I've also had groups that have like talked about positions in the job posting that don't actually exist. And you find out that this is like, someday we'd like to have these positions. And like just like, don't lie to people in the process. And like, I can't believe I even have to say that, but apparently I actually have to say that like, just please be honest with people about what the circumstances are with the job, and don't put them in shitty positions from a legal standpoint. Um, so, so I want to tell one quick story about being on the other end of this that I think folds in with some of this, like, racial justice and gender justice stuff. And so I serve on a nonprofit board, and for a long time the board was much more of a working board, and I was one of the people that was involved with hiring processes for quite a while. And at one point we had a job posting that was for a very part-time job and didn't even pay very well, but being the world being what it is right now, we got over 300 applications for this job. And I was the first reader for the applications. And so I literally, in the course of about a 6-day period, read over, I think it was like 327 applications or something. And when you do that in a short period of time, you have the opportunity to actually start getting some pattern recognition for people, what people do in the job application process. And it became very obvious very quickly that white men, generally speaking, are really fucking lazy about their applications. There were exceptions to that, but for the most part, when you could tell someone's race and gender from their application, um, it is obvious that women of color work 5 times as hard on applications as white men do, and that, you know, men of color and white women were kind of somewhere in the middle of that. And it was shocking to me to have it be so clear. Like I was open to seeing it, and I think that was part of what let me see it. Um, but I think part of why people of color might get discouraged from applying for jobs and women might get discouraged is that um, I think those of us who are in those categories take the application process much more seriously. We follow the instructions. We double check it 6 times as we're doing it. We make sure we're sending in everything in the format that it needs to get sent in on. We answer the questions. We include a cover letter if it says include a cover letter. And it was pretty amazing to me to actually see that evidence. And so I am now thoroughly convinced that the racial and gender biases in hiring processes are super real, and that um, we're having a whole bunch of people who are having to work a lot harder. And I literally got done with that, and I'm like, how do white men get jobs? And it's like, oh, right. Racial biases and gender biases are how white men get jobs. And so I just want to flag that like having somebody do the initial read of applications who has done some work on racial and gender justice stuff and has learned how to check their own biases is, I think, one of the most critical things that organizations can do to have better hiring processes is don't let people read the apps initially and tell you who's worth interviewing who have not done any of that work. So that's the first one. The second thing that I want to talk about just really briefly is wage ratios. 2 of the organizations that I've applied for jobs with are upfront about having a wage ratio on their staff. And what a wage ratio means is that the highest paid person in the organization can't be making in total compensation, so health benefits, bonuses, the whole bit, can't be making more than X times what the lowest paid person in the organization is making. Organizations that have thought it through and have put actual policies like that in place are ones who are tuned into the fact that there are economic justice issues and they're trying to do something about it within the system that they can control, which is their internal system. And this is something that I've seen in worker co-ops, that I've seen in nonprofits. And actually yesterday I was facilitating a conversation for a nonprofit that included a conversation about a wage ratio, and actually got a text message from Matt and I got a text message from a friend of ours who had forwarded something from somebody who's in a labor union and they're wanting to build a wage ratio demand into their conversations that they're about to be going into some negotiations with. And it was like this hugely celebratory moment. Like I've got 2 organizations simultaneously that are excited about doing this and get it, that there's something really powerful. And to me, what's most interesting is, basically what you're saying is like, okay, CEO, sure, you can make $1 million a year, but, say it was like a wage ratio of like even 10-to-1, which is still a really big gap. But you need to figure out how to pay your interns and your janitors and your administrative, assistants at least $100,000 a year, and then you get to make your $1 million a year. And it's like using kind of a capitalist lever to instill a very socialist value of like, we're all in this together and everybody in this endeavor should be getting the benefits of our labor and our success as a company. And it feels like this very sort of backdoor, we're going to insert this thing into the space. and make a demand that says like, great, we're happy that you're a super successful capitalist. Now bring everybody else up with you. Like that's what our demand is basically. And I love it. And so I want to really encourage organizations, businesses, everybody to really be looking seriously at putting wage ratios in place. For me, it's one of the things that communicates like we've actually thought about this shit and we're trying to do good by people. So that's the last thing I wanted to drop into the space.
Well, outstanding. Thank you so much. I think that there's a lot of food for thought here, and we'll be putting it out as a segment on the podcast as well. That discussion over employment practices and just the practice of having to literally sell our labor power, which means going out and pitching our labor power, which means having to play this game that is really has some really imbalanced cultural and socioeconomic practices in a situation where your ability to get a job might be a matter of life and death for
Yep.
you.
Yep.
And so it, to me, really captures the underlying contradictions of the system. And there's also just some things that you could do anyway in the interim before we overthrow this rotten system to make your practices better. You don't have to be the worst of the worst. And so I really appreciate those perspectives and what you have brought into that. We're going to go out the way we came in with our screen share of Bernie in the Muppet balcony.
Yeah.
And we're going to say that we'll be back with some shows next week. We've got lots of news coming out about what's going on here, as well as just ongoing coverage of both eternal and contemporary issues. And so thanks everybody for listening and watching, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.